8-second attention span, it's, I would argue it's probably even like half of that now. Because it's like if you don't get something on the screen that makes a person want to stay or like go deeper, you lost them and they bail, right?
Welcome to Velocitize Talks. I'm Andy North, and I'm joined today by Neil Harner, CEO and founder of Inverse Paradox. Neil, thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Inverse Paradox and some of your background and what you're excited about these days.
Sure. So Inverse Paradox, we're a digital agency that was started in the Philadelphia area back in 2007. It actually was my freelance identity going back to the early 2000s, and I was fortunate enough to build it up to have that sort of agency presence and start bringing some people on. Had a business partner for a period of time who was a dear friend of mine and sort of took on the role of our creative director. And very early on, we fell in love with WordPress, and that's really been good to us over the years, where we started designing and building small business websites with WordPress, which eventually evolved into doing more complex applications and then more e-commerce solutions. And pretty much now, most of the work we're doing tends to be either leaning towards e-commerce solutions or things that are a little bit more involved with the user, such as things that deal with like LMS, software learning management systems, or really complex form integrations with things like Gravity Forms or integrations with tools like Salesforce. So.
Yeah. You mentioned e-commerce. You've obviously seen e-commerce evolve and change up to where it is now. How do you see e-commerce continuing to evolve in the next 3 to 5 years?
So it's interesting where it's going. I mean, the thing that we're seeing a lot right now, which is kind of super cool, is that we're working with a lot more manufacturers and wholesale businesses where they're really trying to build a parallel to a consumer experience, which is really interesting. It's kind of like the light bulb went off and realized that like everybody wants that instant gratification of an Amazon-like shopping experience. So, it's no longer like I want to go through my salesperson or I have to go through this really cumbersome B2B portal. It's how do I go get the right rate for me as the B2B customer, get it into my cart and check out with that sort of seamless flow without having any sort of like disruption or like interjections from like other people within the company. And it ends up being good for the customer as well as the business as well. So it's kind of a win-win.
So some of the more non-traditional industries that you would think of would be, like you said, heavy equipment and so forth. They're going direct to e-commerce.
Yeah, I mean, one of our clients, it's super interesting. All they build is they're a tool and die company, so you're looking at it and you're like, oh, these are like little widgets. They're custom made, devices for other manufacturing processes. But these larger manufacturers are coming in and buying these things in bulk through this sort of like B2B strategy more of a B2C strategy. And it's, super quick, painless, and they're getting their sort of customer specific pricing, and all of this is being built inside of a WooCommerce platform.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Not only are you a CEO and founder of your own agency, but you teach courses at Thomas Jefferson University on interactive design and UX. What are you excited about as far as UX and the future of UX, and what are some of your students working on now?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, working at the university is probably my biggest source of creativity, and being able to do things that are completely outside of websites and apps and things that are on mobile devices. At the university, we're experimenting with virtual reality and augmented reality. Our students are doing a lot to do a little bit more advanced visual communication and thinking about the built environment, which is really interesting. Being Thomas Jefferson University, we are looking at healthcare a lot. That's one of the big sort of cornerstones of the university. So creating those opportunities for our students is absolutely fantastic.
Your team creates both websites and apps. Mm-hmm. Where do you see apps going? Do you see them overtaking websites from a marketing perspective, or do websites still have a place in the marketing spectrum?
So, I've always had a love-hate relationship with the notion of apps, because a lot of people go, I want an app just because I want an app, right? And I look at it and go, it's all the internet. And yeah, there's a good compelling reason as to why you might need an app, depending on, what you're actually trying to accomplish. But in most cases, I think we live in a culture where people are so used to popping open that web browser and just saying, like, what am I looking for? And especially when you start talking about integration of like voice UIs, right? it even creates less friction. Like if you can open up your phone and say, find me a thing, and a web browser opens up and gives you exactly what you're looking for, at that point, it doesn't matter if it's an app or if it's a web browser. Like that is not of consequence to the end user. What matters is they're getting what they're looking for. And I think that as the technology evolves, I think a lot of these ideas are going to start like merging together from a technology standpoint, and it's really just going to be about how do we get the right thing to the right person as quickly as possible, regardless of what the mechanism is.
It's fascinating. You work with a wide variety of clients, from small, medium businesses up to some of the larger brands. How are you able to help a small company that comes to you and says, we really need help, we want to establish our digital marketing presence out there?
So they're actually my favorite people to work with. I prefer the small, medium business over like the larger guys, because you can see the impact more significantly. Like when you do good work, you know it. Whereas like when you work with a bigger guy, and don't get me wrong, I love our biggest clients, but when you work with a big guy, it's like, oh, you see a marginal increase and you're like, oh, that's nice. But when you can actually take something that was built in a haphazard way on a DIY platform like a Wix or, say like a Squarespace or something like that, and then you can build something that's really custom with the understanding of who the audience is, and do that on WordPress and do it well. When you see numbers double and triple, and the person saying my phone's ringing, or I'm getting leads, or oh my gosh, I'm actually getting like 2-3 times the amount of sales, that's really, really rewarding. So when we work with those guys, what we try to do is make the budgets as reasonable as possible, and we go for what I call the crawl, walk, run approach, which is really like, all right, cool, you're probably already at that crawling stage because you have some level of digital presence. Let's get you to walk. Let's establish a really strong foundation. Let's go with a best practices approach, so that way we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, and we know that you'll get, a good ROI on the work that you're doing with us. And then hopefully, after you see some success, you'll invest in new features, new functionality, things that are maybe value adds that'll get you up to that running stage.
With so many content management systems out there in the marketplace, why WordPress?
Honestly, I think WordPress, a lot of its track record. One of the things I absolutely adore about WordPress is the fact that it can do a really good job of being maintained and upgraded. And when you even talk about like building new sites, if you don't have to completely rework the information architecture, you can focus on just the front end and the features without tearing down the entire system. Back in the day, we actually used to do a lot of work with Joomla, and when they were going through upgrades, it was a nightmare to try to like go from like version 1 to 1.5 to 2. This is a long time ago, but that really put a bad taste in our mouth. And then when we did some dabbling with like Expression Engine and Drupal, and we found them to be really cumbersome and difficult to work with. And WordPress, it's easy for the developer, it's easy for the client. You can highly customize the back-end experience, so that way the client can be very focused on their administration, which is a huge, huge thing for us, because our thing is, how do we empower our clients to maintain their own websites? And then when you add, sort of platform as a service behind it, working with people like WP Engine, you're adding even more tools to it, so that way they can have those safety nets and the high security, and that's really been fantastic in how we work with them. So like, I've explored the possibility of working on other content management systems, but right now I have not found one that's compelling enough to say, you know what, sure, maybe one's leaner on the code, maybe one's a little faster, but is that worth the trade-offs of everything else that WordPress gives you? And the answer has been no.
Yeah. Are you using any headless technologies with your clients, and what are the pros and cons of using headless?
So we've been doing a little bit with headless, mostly in the fact that we've been dabbling with BigCommerce offering for doing e-commerce. We love WooCommerce, but when someone comes out and says, hey, we have a headless e-commerce offering, and that could be fully integrated into your WordPress website, that's a really compelling offer, right? So we did some work with it, and we've had a few clients that we've sort of done some proof of concept work with it. And it's interesting, but I think we're still a little ways out on it, just because I think that, especially when it's like, how does that integrate with a WordPress-based experience, the development still needs to be fleshed out a little bit, and so we're still in kind of like early adopter phase. I think give it another year, 2 years, I think that we'll actually see some really fantastic case studies of where that technology can actually be worthwhile to the client. but it's a little off right now.
What are some of the long-term benefits that you see of headless? You mentioned e-commerce. I would assume security, perhaps.
Security definitely is a big one with headless. I think speed will definitely play a role in all that. But also, I think that going back to that point of like when we were talking about like apps versus websites and getting people to like the right product as quickly as possible. One of the things I do love about the whole premise of headless is that you can literally have the same backend infrastructure powering like a complete wide variety of front-end experiences. So we do a lot of work with Magento, and one of the biggest selling propositions with Magento, for example, is that you can really build out a multi-store experience, which is phenomenal. So we do have brands where we have companies with a portfolio of brands that are all running on the same back-end system, and it's very clean, very organized, and it's definitely where we would sort of tap out like WooCommerce, right? But if we can go completely headless with something like a BigCommerce, as an example, you could have any number of storefronts being powered by that same back-end engine.
Are you still able to do exceptional storytelling and brand building with some of your clients in an era of 8-second attention spans?
Yeah, but it's a real challenge. The 8-second attention span, I would argue it's probably even like half of that now, because it's like if you don't get something on the screen that makes a person want to stay or like go deeper, you lost them and they bail, right?
Right.
It's interesting you're mentioning this. We were just having a team conversation where I was saying, from an e-commerce standpoint, I actually find that there's not a lot of innovation in user experience design from an e-commerce perspective, because a lot of it is very standards based. Like the shopping cart's always going to be in the top right. You know what I mean? Like if you change that, you're going to die. But what I find to be interesting is there's a lot more opportunity for the storytelling. And as a company, I'm like, we need to invest more in getting our clients to actually put more money into things like custom photography and custom video, not using stock. Or if they have poor product photography, how do we actually get them higher quality images? Because those are the things I feel like are actually capturing people and making them want to engage and stay there and go deeper, et cetera.
Is there too much content now?
Yes. So there's definitely too much content. We're at a point where it's all noise, and I think that's a problem. You start to lose focus.
Right.
But also, if we think about content more broadly, the way that companies have to track user-generated content and sometimes embrace it or sometimes have to push away from it, it's extremely tactical. And I think that's like the hard thing. It's like there's too many apps, too many social media networks, too many different websites, et cetera, that can be really disruptive to a brand's ability to be effective. I don't necessarily think that there's too much content in terms of what's being generated by the brand itself. I think that there's too much noise being generated by everybody else, and that can be really disruptive to a brand's ability to succeed.
That's fascinating. One of the questions we like to ask our guests is there a book, a blog, or a podcast that you're interested in that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, a book recently published that I've been reading sort of off and on when I have a few minutes here or there is a book called User Friendly. And it's a really great book about, sort of where did interfaces evolve? And it goes through like all different types of technological interfaces that we're dealing with, everything from like flight controls in a plane, and sort of sky's the limit, but it's these really like great sort of like historical stories, for lack of a better way of putting it. And it's good reading to the point that like I'm actually making my students read it at the university, because it helps them to better understand how to really study problems, understand the problems, and then design around that, not just design because you think it's a good idea.
My guest today has been Neil Harner, founder and CEO of Inverse Paradox. Neil, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate it.